Well, good evening. This is Houndlock Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening. And, as I was walking around today, I was pleasantly surprised to see some civil disobedience taking place in our stores and on our streets, certainly in my area, as there were so few people wearing masks. And it seems when I've had the odd conversation here or there in lineups with other people, that I think people really are waking up to the fact that this lockdown was a complete overkill reaction to what seems to be an average outbreak. And it's just, this last 3 or 4 months has been absolutely stunning. The contradictory information such as mask wearing. Should you wear one? Shouldn't you wear one? Should you wear it indoors? Should you wear it outdoors? Is it good for your health? Is it bad for your health? And now I'm starting to see articles on fungus lung, a spike in fungus lung in New York State, and they put this down to the wearing of masks and the recirculating of your own air. And of course, because we're into the hot, hazy and humid, again, the health department is saying when it's hot, hazy and humid, do not wear these masks. So this is completely contradictory information. I've been noticing, for example, that if you go to a particular political protest, depending on what it is, for example, if you go to a BLM protest, it is apparently impossible to transmit this disease to another person or to catch it from another person. However, if you go to an anti-lockdown protest, you are a threat to humanity. Now, of course, we all know that it's impossible to hold those two thoughts in our heads at the same time. Anyway, one of the things that's kind of been crossing my mind just lately is, because we keep hearing about the case count and, the increasing cases and so on and so forth, but we have no baseline to compare that to. We've never ever done this before in our history of flus, outbreaks, colds, influenzas, pneumonias, all this kind of stuff. We've never counted the amount of people who get this every year. We only count the people who go into the outpatients, hospital, or end up passing away because of these things. So until we have tested 8 billion people on this planet, and probably done that for 2 or 3 years in a row, we really won't get an idea of what a standard season looks like as far as the number of people who are going to test positive. So these numbers are in fact completely bogus. We could, for example, every season, everyone could come down with an influenza, but we just don't know it because we don't show any symptoms. The other thing is that the changing names. We had asymptomatic, and then the WHO came out and said that there is no asymptomatic spread, and all of a sudden we come up with a new term called pre-symptomatic, whatever the heck that means. There is also the fact that the WHO and the CDC are now saying that 50%, up to 50% of tests are false positives. And so how could you possibly get a handle on all of this? And this is why I come back to this single chart, and this is the influenza-like illnesses outpatients. Okay, this chart is so important because, as you will see here, this is from Niagara region. So if you look at this chart and the description below, it says that they don't separate cases. So you could have in fact had CV and died of something else, but it would list as if you died from CV. Now, if this was a real situation, you wouldn't have to do that. You wouldn't have to juggle your figures to come up with those kind of answers. And that is why this chart, the outpatients chart, you see, it's one of these things that I think are kind of slipped through the process here, because it really does tell you the truth. Now, because people are outpatients, what's happened is they've reached a point where they have got enough symptoms to say, hey, I feel really bad here, I think I better go to hospital. And when they go to the hospital, they don't separate these people from influenza, pneumonia, cold, whatever it is. If you have influenza-like illness symptoms, you are marked down as a case. So it's pretty accurate and unbiased. And of course they do this year after year, decade after decade. And so when you look at this chart, it really gives you a clear impression of what is taking place during this outbreak. And as you can quite clearly see, it is a normal influenza season as far as the outpatients are concerned. So because as I'm walking around I'm seeing there's civil disobedience taking place, I think that the wheels are falling off the wagon of this narrative. You know, we had Agenda 21, I don't know if you remember the UN Agenda 21, and now all of a sudden it's become UN Agenda 2030. And that tells you that they weren't prepared. They knew they weren't going to be ready by 2021. And all of the things that they had to put in place for their technocratic wet dream society was now going to take till 2030. Well, something happened during this outbreak, and I guess they decided to pull the trigger. Now, what was motivating that? I have no idea. But they have completely mistimed the pulling of the trigger. And the reason is because, you know, when this was really declared, we were just kind of reaching the peak of the annual influenza season. So now we've run on into summer, and as we can see, the cases have fallen off a cliff. The outpatient visits have fallen off a cliff. When you walk around, things seem perfectly normal, and of course they are, because the vast majority of deaths are happening in long-term care facilities, which of course is absolutely to be expected. Now there may be a little bit of a blip because you know, you'll see the arrow is turning up a little bit at the bottom, and that is because, you know, some of the low-hanging fruit that didn't get picked up on the first run is now being exposed in the real world, and so you're going to get some more people are going to get infected. Now, I mean, let me be clear about this. You know, I'm not trying to play down the seriousness of influenza as a disease. We've been trying for 250,000 years. It's been the bane of humankind to try and deal with and defeat these viruses that come around from time to time on a yearly basis, and we still haven't really managed to do that yet. We have inoculations, but they are far from effective. We're talking maybe 14 to 50% effectiveness in any given season. Now, what I'm coming to here is an article that I found, and it's very, very interesting, and I think you need to take in this information because it basically tells you that you still have to consent before you get the injection. And this is one of Mr. Bill's worrying situations, because you know, 30% of Americans do not feel comfortable with this inoculation, and of course the normal time span to introduce an inoculation is about 5 to 10 years with all of the trials and testing that's involved. And so when you push something through in 18 months, you know that all the trials have not been done properly. They're fast tracking everything, and so they're basically asking you to consent to be part of a huge human trial experiment, and you don't have to do that. And this article confirms that they do need your consent. But before I do that, I'm just going to play you a little bit of a clip, and this is Bill and his wife at a town hall meeting, and check out the body language. It's a pretty ominous piece, and it's talking about the next wave. But check out the body language when he's talking about the people who managed to prepare early and didn't have such a harsh effect from this outbreak, and that the next time will be, you know, a bigger impact. But look at the glee on those. They're like the cat that ate the canary. They are just so happy that people are going to sit up and pay attention to the next round. Okay, here we go. Let's take a little look at that, and I'll follow up with the article, and then I will do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go.
We didn't actually do the simulation to think about, okay, what about nursing homes? What about getting factories ready? What about the testing regime? You know, in fact, the testing could have been ramped up very quickly, and a few countries that have almost avoided the epidemic entirely, like Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia. They took their experience and actually prepared, and so they moved a lot faster. So we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is will get attention this time.
From RT, Bill Gates says final hurdle to distributing a CV shot will be convincing people to take it. Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates lamented the US is not even close to doing enough to fight the outbreak, before warning that the shot he wants to give every human being on the planet does require their consent first. Fancy that. Speaking to Anderson Cooper at a CNN town hall on Thursday, Gates insisted the US was experiencing a rebound in the outbreak, even accounting for the increase in testing. That increase, the software tycoon reminded his interviewers, was accomplished by local governments in spite of, not because of, the White House. Gates seemed miffed that Washington wasn't following his instructions more closely, complaining that it's possible to ramp up testing for a new pathogen very, very fast if they just do as they were told. He blamed the higher infection numbers in the US, which continues to lead the world with upwards of 2.5 million confirmed cases and over 125,000 deaths, on the nation's failure to adopt the same measures as everybody else. Other countries are restraining their behaviour, imposing restrictive lockdowns and quarantines and adopting comprehensive contact tracing, Gates hinted, sounding impatient with the US' very large case spread, which he called embarrassing. Some people almost feel like CV is a political thing, which is unfortunate. Even to inconvenience themselves with masks requires maybe someone they know to not only test positive, but maybe get very sick as well, he added. Now remember, 50% of all tests are false positives. Gates, who repeatedly expressed a desire to inoculate the world's population with whatever shot emerges from the research laboratories he is funding, admitted the shot might be rolled out before it's working perfectly. Oh, fancy that. It's possible the shot will be better at protecting you individually and not stop you from transmitting. It's not guaranteed that the shot will be a perfect transmission blocker. Boasting that the logistics in the US are not an issue at all, Gates bragged that we can get this thing out there, before acknowledging that you'll have a choice whether you take the shot or not. So there's the final hurdle. The billionaire seemed unconcerned by the inoculation hesitancy factor. However, even though over a third of Americans have professed some concern over the safety of a CV shot, citing the politicization of the issue, the rushed timetable, the less than stellar reputation of some of the individuals involved, and other issues. Some 70 to 80% of the world's population will have to take the inoculation before anyone can hope to live a normal life again, with people taking shots, travel and sporting events, Gates explained, implying they had no choice. Well, there you go, there you have it. They may think we have no choice, but you have a choice, and you can refuse to take this experimental inoculation and run the risk of doing real damage next time around that you get infected, because that's when the problem happens. Not after you take the inoculation. It is when you run into that virus again and you go into a cytokine storm, and that's when your lungs fill with fluid and you collapse. So think about that, my friends, and don't try anything that hasn't been fully tested on those who are expecting you to take this without question. So I just wanted to remind you in closing that you can refuse to consent to the inoculation, and you can engage in simple acts of civil disobedience like not wearing a mask, stepping outside the lines. I mean, I make a point, even though it's a small point, I make a point of not standing exactly where I've been told to stand, and I usually straddle the line, or I'll stand just outside the line. All just little acts of civil disobedience. And of course I also bring up the conversation as often as I can You know, for example, I was in a bar restaurant patio on the weekend, and you know, I was talking to a chap, and he brought his cell phone with him. And I said, why on earth would you bring your cell phone? You're brave. You come into a place like this, no cell phone, cash only, no credit cards. And the reason is because a friend of mine, her niece, okay, she went to a restaurant and there was a situation where there was a positive case, and they tracked her by her credit card use. And she was quarantined for 2 weeks. So yes, I would not be taking any kind of credit card or cell phone into these situations where there are lots of people around, and because you don't want to get caught up in contact tracing. And I don't think people quite realize how devastating and how far-reaching that will be, because it will be a no if and or but situation, and your life will come to a complete end for 2 weeks. So please be aware of that as you're traveling around. Use your Faraday pouch if you have to go somewhere and you do not want to be tracked, but you need to have your phone with you. These are all little things you can do to try and avoid getting caught up in this net. Okay, well, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. And in the meantime, this is Hamburg Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. You take care now. See ya. Bye.